Well, I'm Joel Marsden. I'm a filmmaker, an activist, and I just spent the last 8 years making the film World Vote Now that deals with the possibility of holding the first global referendum.
Why do you think there is a need for global referendum?
Well, I previously, with previous film projects and my own personal travels, I'd really seen that there was a lot of serious problems in this planet. You know, extreme poverty and really just a lack of access, a serious system where you actually have first, second and third class citizens on this planet, right, that have completely different realities. And I thought, how can we try to improve that? How can we try to improve the situation, not just on a small scale, but actually on the big scale? And it occurred to me that perhaps by applying democracy on the global level, we could achieve that.
So what is democracy for you?
It certainly isn't just throwing a piece of paper in a box, right?
So it's more than having the right to vote.
Absolutely. Voting is one mechanism within a democratic system. And as you see, I've seen this firsthand, right? You go to a country like Democratic Republic of Congo that has gone through a great civil war and dictatorship and all of this hardship. And that if you don't have democracy, you realize that people are extremely insecure, right? You do have poverty as part of that, but it's also rule of law, freedom of speech. And these are things that when you and I talk about this here in the pretty little castle in Germany, you know, it sounds very abstract. But freedom of speech, when you speak out and speak your mind, and then somebody shows up in the night and drags you away and you disappear forever, that's a serious issue. When you get into democracy, what you're setting up is a way, a system, where the people can actually have a say, can participate. I personally like the idea of direct democracy. That's why I'm dealing with a global referendum, right?
What is the core idea behind it from the movie?
Very simple. What we did is an investigation, right? Is it possible to extend universal suffrage to every man and woman on the planet? Is it possible to hold the first world vote so that we can decide on the biggest issues? Climate change, the Millennium Goals, violent conflict, and the reform of international institutions that are not democratic.
Who decides what the global issues are?
Well, the global issues are defined by the need of the people, right? By how many people are affected by a problem and how serious are these problems. And that's where a lot of work has really already been done. I would say that the Millennium Goals are a relatively good list of basic problems that really affect hundreds of millions, and in some cases billions of people, right?
Yeah.
And it's that lack of food, medicine, technology, education, climate change is also part of that. So those, I think, should be the priorities. But the questions for the referendum are now going to be defined by the national committees that are joining in this effort to build the world.
So there is a chance to have a global vote?
Indeed, there's not just a chance. I mean, here's the interesting thing. The film World Vote Now is an 8-year investigation to see if it is possible to hold a global referendum. We went to 26 countries, spread out over all the regions of the planet, and we tried out also physical tests. So we built, for instance, for the regions that have zero connectivity, we built a satellite voting machine that works anywhere on the planet. We also held an e-voting simulation. So we tried to see how far does the internet reach. And we were able to register participants in 190 countries and territories. Right? The only people that couldn't take part in this were the people of North Korea, because there's just no internet. So that's what World Vote Now, the research and the film is. Now the film was completed a year ago, and we screened it at the COP15 talks in Copenhagen. And what happened there is that Evo Morales of Bolivia was the first head of state who got up and said, enough of this stuff here at these climate talks. You're not making a decision. And the reason that there's no decisions made on climate change is because the process is not democratic. And at that point, that's when we gained some momentum. We were invited to show the film inside the European Parliament. Very good discussion there, where people clearly see a need for a global democracy, because you're already dealing there with a transnational democracy, right? Then, after that, we were invited to the World People's Summit in Bolivia. What you had there is, it's sort of like a World Social Forum setting, right? NGOs from around the world, some government actors as well. Literally people from 140 countries were present. And there was a declaration that we indeed are going to go ahead and organize this global referendum.
So how are you planning to set up these national committees? Or these
well, it's the kind of thing that each organization or individual basically volunteers to be part of this. And our first step of business, once we have these national committees established everywhere, is to define the questions of the global referendum.
Yeah, but how are you going to establish these committees?
I've been, over the last 8 years dealing with this topic. I've been in touch with a lot of these NGOs and groups. Even here, the contacts I made over these last 2 days, there's certainly going to be several people here that are going to join and form their own committee.
So it's pure grassroots moving?
It's completely grassroots, but of course we all have our own contacts there with government actors or institutions, etc. The great thing about a world vote is that we need to involve everybody, right? The only way it's valid is if every man and every woman of voting age can participate, right? And so that's a big job, but it's also fun because it really means trying to invite and mobilize and motivate everybody.
So what would be the task of such a national committee?
Right. The first task is to establish yourself so that it's like having a foothold everywhere, right? And then the initial task is to define the questions of the global referendum. And this is a huge job.
I guess so. We were discussing this yesterday, and I won't go in details there right now. But what is your plan? How should people vote? Is the internet playing a role, or the machine you were using already?
Right.
Or?
This is one thing that we did a lot of research in. Now, what you have is the actual brick and mortar, traditional paper voting. There's about 72% of the world is already covered by that, which is huge. Including China has its own national voting system, right?
But it's also very expensive, though.
Well, again, these national systems already exist, and you could potentially combine an election that is already happening and have just an additional ballot. And of course, not every nation is going to just give that to us. But part of my research, I met, for instance, with the head of the Electoral Commission in Nigeria, and they have already volunteered that we can use their system, and that's the most populous country in Africa. Same with India. I spoke with the heads of the electoral commissions of 2 states, and they basically felt that it was completely viable to hold a world vote. The technical aspect isn't such a big deal. What I'm saying though is that you have this sort of paper, brick and mortar, then you have some sort of new technology aspects. The internet is not the safest way to hold an election, but there are ways to use the internet, especially to build out a global voting system and network. And you could, for instance, I would say the developed countries in the north, you could very easily, like for instance, you don't need to have the approval of every European country to hold, a world vote. That you could use the internet in many places and really include a lot of people. And then the third aspect are the places that don't have any access whatsoever. And there you do need to build a little bit of infrastructure. One of the things that we're exploring there is that satellite voting machine that I mentioned, which is quite, it's off-the-shelf technology, open source, the one that we built, very cheap really. And it works anywhere in the world because the world is already covered 100%. Like there's, I think, 4 or 5 commercially available satellite systems that cover every corner of the planet. So it's not, when people talk about the digital divide and stuff, well, of course, because people can't tap into it, right? And it's expensive to use it, but it's there. It's just waiting to be tapped into. And so if you start combining these things and create a patchwork, you could today already hold a world vote, basically.
So